Hello and welcome to another episode of the Defining the Dash podcast. I'm Mark Mullins, joined today with my friend, Brother Chad Clifton.
Hello, everybody.
Glad you stopped by to listen to us. Apparently, grass is not growing right now, so we may have more listeners than what we normally do.
Or
So,
we may have fewer.
or we may have fewer.
People might like it better when the mower's drowning us out.
They may do. Brother Chad, we've been on this little kick, and we've been talking about the fruits of the Spirit.
Yes, sir.
And we've been on this Bible health kick, if you will.
Yeah, the Christian diet.
Yeah, the Christian diet. And we talked a little bit about love and then joy. And then for you listeners, you will remember last week we talked about peace, very important fruit of the Spirit. And then today we're going to the next fruit of the Spirit in this Christian diet, and it is something called long-suffering.
Now, long-suffering reminds me of the word diet.
Yes, long-lasting.
Yeah,
or suffering.
And you was suffering, and suffering long.
Yeah.
Suffering long is definitely I think that is definitely a definition of diet.
Absolutely.
And so that's I think the titles of this, the Christian diet and long suffering, going together would be perfect.
You know, with all of our diet experience, Brother Chad, we may be able to talk about this one for a while. You know what I mean?
It could be long.
It could be long.
And it could be painful.
And
it's you listeners that's going to be suffering.
Absolutely. All right, but let's make it short and sweet. Make the needle not hurt that much.
Yeah,
right?
We'll make it like a Twinkie, short and sweet.
Exactly. All right. But Chad, the Bible tells us in Ephesians chapter number 4, it says here, I therefore, the prisoner of the Lord, beseech you that you walk worthy of the vocation wherewith ye are called, with all lowliness and meekness, with long suffering, forbearing one another in love, endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. So there's a challenge here from Paul to the church at Ephesus to walk worthy of the vocation that they are called, and in their walk in that vocation, to be lowly and meek, to forbear one another in love, but also with long suffering. What was Paul talking about when he's telling somebody to be long suffering? Right into the church.
Well, I think one thing that we can look back at here, and this is just something that's come to me, and I'm sure it applies in the case here that Paul's talking about too. But if we look back at the previous fruits of the Spirit, you got love,
okay,
you got joy, you got peace. Those are happy things. Okay. And if we just went based off of all the ones surrounding this, love, joy, peace, gentleness, goodness, faith, you know, that kind of seems like a Christian is never going to have a problem. But when you look at long suffering, you know, long suffering in the midst of these kind of seems like, yeah, there may be times that trouble's going to come, whether that's between brothers and sisters, or you know, in Christ, or whether that's between neighbors, or whether that's physical pain and ailments, or you know, there's going to be hard times that's going to come, but you know, Christ is going to give us the ability to endure trouble and deal with it, even if it's for the long run. Deal with it patiently and in the right way. Absolutely. And so, you know, it hadn't really stood out to me until while you was reading that scriptures, and I was reading over back over Galatians 5:22, and I'm like, you know, you got love and joy and peace and gentleness and goodness and faith, and right in the middle of them, right separated them, is long suffering.
Yep.
That kind of seems like
it's an odd spot to be, right?
That's an odd place to be, right in the middle of all these happy, wonderful things. You got long suffering.
That's interesting.
And and you know, God did everything for a reason.
Sure.
And so I find it really interesting how, and you know, at least in my old country mind, how right in the midst of all these good things, you know, you may have this moment of suffering.
Right.
You may have this dark time, but in that dark time, Christ don't leave us.
Absolutely.
He gives us the ability to endure, and he carries us through that.
Yeah. You know, long suffering Adam Clark gives a definition. And he talks about how long suffering is also long mindedness.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that was a thing. You know what I
No.
mean? Now, sometimes at the end of the day, having 4 kids run around, 3 kids run around, 1 kid crawling around,
Oh yeah.
I feel like my mind is spent.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Burn
out. But I don't know if, I feel like I deal with some long mindedness, but that's probably not the same thing.
Probably not.
But he goes on to say that long suffering or long mindedness is bearing with the frailties and provocations of others, other people's weaknesses. And when people provoke you,
Yes.
bearing with that from the consideration that God has borne long with heirs, and that if he had not, we should have been speedily consumed.
Wow.
That's a thought, isn't it?
It is.
It's a thought.
It is.
Looking at life when people's weaknesses or frailties or the things they do that drive you nuts.
Yeah.
We got this neighbor. I'm not going to say which side of the house he lives on because he may be listening to podcasts. Probably not. But he may be. You never know. We got people from everywhere. So we have this neighbor that absolutely loves, my wife's going to know exactly what I'm talking about, but he loves to rev up his motorcycle. And I like a good motorcycle. I don't know what sounds good necessarily, what sounds bad. I don't know that much about motorcycles. I know that you normally have 2 wheels. Sometimes they can have 3 wheels, whatever. So I don't know much about them. But this guy loves to do it. And it sounds pretty good. It sounds kind of manly. But what gets me is he does it about 10 o'clock at night.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so now some of us got to work, and you got to go early, or, the kids, the baby sleeps on that in the house. And so, you're worried it's going to wake the baby up, kind of thing. But man, I was talking to Jen the other night. I was like, man, this guy's driving me crazy. But the reality of it is, brother, we live in the country. And so where the creek starts is where our house is. We're up in the holler, if you will. And so because where we live at, there is no call on the cops because there's not a curfew on sound.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so really, sometimes I'm tempted to go out and start my truck up and rev my truck up and see who can be louder. Now, I haven't done that yet.
Gas is too expensive.
You're exactly right. And I'm missing the muffler, so I would be the guy getting in trouble.
Yeah.
Probably so. Not the motorcycle guy. But, but sometimes I feel like, man, you are provoking the whole neighborhood.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But, when I look at this word and I look at this definition and think about how that guy provokes me at 10 o'clock at night, a couple nights of the week. And I think of this, I think, man, I kind of feel convicted because here we see that the definition of this is bearing with the frailties and provocations of others, thinking about how God has long bore with us.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, and if it wasn't for that, we would have been consumed.
Yeah.
Yeah. COVID. You got COVID.
No.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, that's right. I went through some things with some of my neighbors before, and had some issues that the law was involved with.
Mm-hmm.
And it was such a taxing thing. It stressed you out so much. I was afraid to leave my home, but I was afraid to be at home.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't want to step outside. I didn't want to, it was constantly something,
Mm-hmm.
and they find, the neighbor ended up doing something,
Something about these neighbors.
The situation got to. I'm trying to think of a way to put this where it's not, sounding of condoning any of these wrong actions that he did or anything. But he did do something finally where he and his wife, parted ways, and he left, and the situation has greatly improved since he left. His wife was involved in some of it before. But since then, she and I have been, able to be neighborly.
Mm-hmm.
I would do anything I could to help him out, and I have tried to help him out in any way I could. I think a lot of their son, and I try to help him out in any way I can. I told him, I said, I know, your husband was the cause of a lot of the trouble, and I said I would still try to help him out in any way I could.
Sure.
Um, I'm glad that that issue is, resolved.
Right.
I'm not exactly pleased with the way it's resolved,
Sure.
because of the situation that he and her had to go through in order for it to fix my situation.
Right.
But and the situation potentially brought harm to my children, damaged a lot of my property. I mean, a lot of different things that was done, and and it was, you know, it was such a draining moment. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It was a time. I was going to a church meeting in Pennsylvania one time, and I was so excited to finally get to go. I'd never been there before, and all these things. And I get there, and we're up there, and services are going great. And right before I left to go up there, I'd got one of my vehicles out of the garage. I'd hit a deer, and correction, the deer hit me.
Was his name John?
And no.
Okay, just curious.
And but the old John Deere, and but this deer had come up and ran right to the side of the vehicle, came up from over a hill, and nailed me right in the side of the vehicle, and done over $4,000 worth of damage to the van.
Okay.
And so it had been in the garage for a couple of weeks. Just got it out, took it to the house, parked it, went on this church, to this church meeting, and my mother-in-law was going over to take some mail over to us or do something. I can't remember what she was doing, get her mail, something like that. And she just happened to go by the house, make sure everything was okay. And that neighbor had went by this freshly painted vehicle and everything, and had to have taken a knife and carved stuff all in the side of that van.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to the point the brand new headlights and stuff that had been replaced, they cut into the headlights.
Wow.
So, I mean, it wasn't just using a key or anything. I mean, it took a lot of effort. And so, she calls me, I'm in Pennsylvania, and I'm crushed and devastated. I'm
Sure.
like, I'm trying my best to live right. I'm trying to be kind to these people. It seems like everything I do, things just keep getting worse, And at one point, I did allow it to affect my spirituality.
Sure.
And this is me admitting and being, we always say on here, or at least I do, that we're just trying to be transparent.
Right.
I make mistakes just as much as anybody. And my wife told me at one point, she said, "Hey, we're the Christians here," and in a moment of frustration and really just stupidity, I said, "And what has it got me?"
No, that's fair.
And immediately I felt so defeated, that it had let me get to that point.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That I had allowed myself to get to that point because this was not God's fault.
Sure.
God had not left me in this,
Right.
And so it was just a time of trouble that I was going through that God had not left me in. And things worked out. The Bible tells us, this too shall pass.
Right.
And it did. The storm did pass. And but through that, yes, there was frustrations. Yes, there was troublesome times. There was some worrisome times. There was times that I just really didn't know what we were going to do. I mean, I looked at putting my house up for sale and just leaving. I looked at all kinds of different options. And I mean, the law was at my house almost every other day, but God stayed with us through that, and He allowed us to endure that. And now I have a good relationship with some of those folks.
Yeah.
And so, that's just my rant on this, I guess. I don't know really if I can tie that back in or not. But
hey, man, make yourself a home.
Yeah. And so I apologize, but it feels good to get it off my chest.
Yeah,
folks.
he feels
So
better.
thank you for my free therapy
His
session.
blood pressure's getting lower.
I'll raise up off this couch now and give someone else a turn to talk.
Hey, you got good insurance, man. Just stay here. Just stay right here where you're at.
Yeah, who needs my insurance card at the moment? That way they can bill me for this.
You know, circling back around to where we started with, you was talking about how long suffering is sometimes going through life without murmuring. And I'm not sure the verbiage you used, but Adam Clark said too that long suffering was bearing up also through all the troubles and difficulties of life without murmuring or repining. And then he said it was also submitting cheerfully to every dispensations of God's providence, every part of God's providence, and thus deriving benefit from every occurrence. It's going, Brother Chad, it's going through life when the sun isn't shining and things aren't going the way that I want it to go.
Right.
And still knowing that God has got control.
Yes.
And that regardless of where my situation is, I can learn something and there can be some benefit that can come to me.
That's a big thing right there. That statement, deriving benefit from every occurrence.
Yeah. No, that's not mine by original. It's Adam's.
Right.
But Adam.
Adam was pretty wise.
Yeah.
He
like
seems to be. I mean, I'm
like
relatively new to the Adam Clark commentary and everything, but he does seem to have some great points. And that being one of them. I mean, deriving benefit from every occurrence, because there's a lot of occurrences that take place in our life that we're like, what good can come of this?
You know, a great example, Brother Chad, right now, you know, our listeners will know very well probably from the news, but you have the flooding that's going on.
Yes.
And man, I remember a few years ago in Ritter Holler. If you might out there know where Ritter is, it's in McDowell County, West Virginia. Anyway, Ritter Holler was, or Hollow, we call it Holler in these parts. But Ritter was, there's a cloudburst that took place on top of that mountain.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you remember that. It's probably been about 10 years. I'm very bad with guessing times, but it's been a few years ago. And I still have an aunt that lives up in that area. And I had an uncle at the time and some cousins. And I remember driving up through there with Dad, and we was going up in that holler, and the road, there was so much water that some places the road had washed out. So if some of the listeners have ever been to a flooded area, you know, sometimes where there's just no road, you have rocks and dirt that you're traveling on. And it was interesting that there's some parts of the road where the asphalt was literally picked up from one side of the creek, and then after the flood, the road and the creek literally switched sides.
Yes.
Yeah, and so the asphalt was over here where the creek was, and the creek had filled in, and the water had pulled the asphalt on top of where the creek was, almost like it was paved that way. It was the craziest thing I've ever seen in my life. I've seen some crazy stuff. That's one of the craziest. Probably not the craziest, but anyway, so we're driving up through there, man, and you know, every few houses you had people out there. They didn't have electricity. Still don't have, as far as I know, any kind of cell phone reception. You know, I mean, it's back in the holler. A lot of good people. But anyway, but every couple houses, man, I remember you'd have people out there that was grilling up steaks.
Oh yeah,
and just get, because they didn't have electricity, and if you didn't use them, it's going to go bad. And so, like, man, everybody's eating great for like 2 days. You know what I mean? Everybody's eating steaks and burgers and that kind of stuff.
Cleaning their freezers out.
Clean them freezers out. But when you fast forward, a week or two, and all the steaks were eaten, and all the hamburgers and hot dogs were gone, and all that good stuff was gone, you still had a sense of community,
right?
And that community, the last I heard, around that time on it, is that those neighbors were closer together
after the time of trouble
and cared more about each other after the time of trouble. And they were already pretty tight knit mountain people. Sure. They were better than family after that.
Yeah.
But you're talking about something, when something bad, difficulty, and trouble in life, but they still found some way to count their blessings of how they were still alive.
Yes.
And they were still able to eat each other, and they found some kind of benefit from that occurrence.
Yes, those times of trouble that bring you, sometimes you'll have situations of like that seems to tear people apart, but most of the time it brings areas together.
Brings them together.
It really does. And during, like you was talking about, all this flooding and this hurricane that just came through, and it's brought a lot of communities together.
Yep.
It's brought, government assistance has really been very limited. And so a lot of the reliance has been on community.
Mm-hmm.
And, here in Southwest Virginia, we got hit. And I can never remember us ever being hit by a hurricane before.
Right.
We didn't get it as bad as others, but we're a lot farther north than a lot of the other places are. But for us to really get much other than just a little bit of rain off of it, or a little bit of wind, I mean, was just unreal.
Right.
And so, here we are, and just a few weeks ago, there was of course, Richlands Tabernacle has been wonderful, providing food and stuff for folks in need.
Mm-hmm.
They've went to Damascus and different areas that needed help, and they volunteered. Even though some of the volunteers didn't even have power and stuff, they went and helped other people that were in need. But here in Richlands, there was a church in Mississippi, I think, that sent food and supplies from Mississippi to Richlands.
Yeah.
To the people in this area.
Yeah.
And that just blew my mind, thinking, okay, Mississippi, they probably were closer to the damage than what really we are,
Mm-hmm.
And they sent supplies all the way up here,
Yeah.
to people they don't know.
Right.
And it just, man, it touched my heart to think of that.
Mm-hmm.
That one day they had food over there that was sent here for anybody in need that needed it, from all the way from Mississippi. We don't know those people there. They didn't know us. They didn't know.
Right.
And man, what a blessing, just to know that. And that does it. It gives you just comfort in knowing that, that goes back to the Bible talking about bear you one another's burdens, and
right.
and taking care of one another.
Yeah. Brother Chad, you're talking about being long suffering to each other and in their own individual lives. The Bible tells us in 2 Peter chapter 3 that the Lord is not slack concerning his promise,
Right,
as some men count slackness, but is long suffering to usward, not willing that any should perish, but all should come to repentance.
Yeah.
So here we see that the Lord is long suffering towards us. He's long-minded towards us. He bears with our frailties.
Yeah.
And when we provoke him,
he sees our weaknesses.
He sees our weaknesses.
He's patient with us.
Yes, and he's patient with us. And so if you're out in radio land today, listener, and you're wondering what God thinks about you, and
oh yeah,
well, there it is. God's long-suffering, and really, probably the reason why you're still breathing, the same reason why I'm still breathing, is the long-suffering of God.
Yes.
It's got a lot to do with that.
And Jeremiah 29:11, one of my favorite scriptures, it always says, I know the thoughts that I have toward you,
Yep.
thoughts of good, not of evil. The remainder of it now slips my mind. But I've always thought about that, what God thinks of me.
Yep.
And that's a scary thought.
Mm-hmm.
But what a sweet, precious thought to even think that God thinks of us.
So much, man, that he would.
So much that he just
give his son.
Yeah, gave his son to die for us.
Yep.
And, sometimes I think we forget that.
Yep.
And then to know that he sees our weaknesses,
mm-hmm.
like we're talking about there, and he's just still has patience with us.
Yep.
When we will lose patience with so many others.
Yep.
And just like my neighbor I was talking about a while ago, I lost patience with him.
Sure.
But I've probably failed God way more than that neighbor ever did to me.
Sure.
And so, and God has given me forgiveness and a chance, forgiveness and another chance, forgiveness and another chance, time after time. And so I'm so thankful.
Yep.
So thankful for what God's done for me.
Brother Chad, I say we take a bite of that fruit of long suffering.
Yeah.
And let it get down the gut. And nourish us the way that God intended it for us to.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you, listeners, for tuning in again this week. We hope that you're having a great week and it continues to get better.
Amen. God bless you. See you next week.
Don't forget to like and subscribe.
Absolutely. Thumbs up.
Long suffering.
When I win this war, I've got a church.